Jesus represents in the story a symbol. It's a metaphor. And Jesus is a metaphor for the sun. And so boiling it down, Christianity is sun worship based on astrology. Because nobody owns the sun. Africans don't own it. And we don't own the sun. So obviously the sun belongs to God. So it's God's sun. And he's the light of the world. Of course the sun's the light of the world. What else lights the world if it's not the sun? And he has 12 helpers. Of course, the 12 signs of the zodiac, the 12 months of the year. He is our risen Savior. Of course, it rises every morning about 5:30. And the sun is your Savior. If it don't come up, we're dead. So once you start breaking down the symbols in the Old and the New Testament, you begin to see that Christianity is basically astrology and sun worship. But it has been so well hidden and so cleverly disguised. And once you start breaking it down and reading the whole story, it becomes overwhelmingly obvious this is what we're talking about. He has a virgin birth. He's born of a virgin, of course. Virgin birth because one of the constellations of the zodiac is Virgo, Virgo the Virgin. Let me give you an example of how this works. On the first day of summer, the very first day of summer, the sun is as high in the northern hemisphere as it's going to go. It doesn't go any further north. The first day of summer, the sun is as high in the northern hemisphere, and it begins to work its way south. And each day it moves 1 degree. And as it moves 1 degree each day, 90 days later, or 90 degrees later, it's halfway down. So now we say that the sun was the Lion King in summer. The Lion King because the sun was in the constellation of Leo, the Lion King from Disney. But then as the sun moves southward, it finally hits Scorpio. So God's sun was really hot. He was the Lion King, but now he's falling. So now we call it fall because he's falling, and he's falling south. So it moves into fall in Scorpio. This is why Judas gives Jesus the kiss of death, because Judas represents Scorpio. And Scorpio gives the God's Son, the light of the world, the kiss of death. And now he's going to die in Capricorn. He's going to die and go all the way down. But what's interesting about this is that the sun goes all the way down south until it hits what is called the winter solstice. And that's on December 22nd, the sun hits the lowest point on the sky in the south on December 22nd. It's called the winter solstice, the beginning of winter. And for 3 days, the United States Navy will show and explain it to you that the sun comes up for 3 days, 22nd, 23rd, and 24th, on the same degree. It doesn't go any further south, and it doesn't come back north. But on the same degree that it was on December 22nd, the sun rises the next 2 days, 23rd and 24th, on the same degree. So the ancient people said that the sun was alive. He was the lion of the tribe of Judah, Leo. He got the kiss of death from Scorpio, and now he is 3 days, he's not moving at all. So therefore he's in his tomb for 3 days. Then on the 25th of December, the sun moves 1 degree northward. And you can calculate that as the Navy does. You can calculate it's very slight, but if you got the right instruments, you can see the sun move 1 degree northward. Therefore, it came back to life. So now we celebrate God's Son being born again. He's born again. When? On December 25th. So we celebrate Christmas on Christ's Mass. But as the sun moves back toward the northern hemisphere, it crosses over the equator at spring. Because he was dead in winter, now he's springing back to life. So as he comes back to life and crosses over the equator, there was a celebration called the Passover, because the sun has passed over the equator, coming back to the northern hemisphere. And so today we even say when someone dies, we say grandmother passed last night, grandfather passed away, or they passed on. But always past was associated with death. So God's Son has passed over the equator. So once a year, around the world, the Jews celebrate the Passover, which is nothing more than the sun passing over the equator. And Christians, of course, cannot do that because that's Jewish, and they wouldn't want to have anything to do with the Jewish celebration. So Christians have a totally different celebration. They call it the resurrection of God's Son. And so they go out on the Passover and go out and have something called the Easter sunrise service. So you actually have Christians going out and waiting for the sun to come up for something called a sunrise service. I mean, what is that all about? Christians are worshiping the sun, and then when you start looking at how the word S-O-N and S-U-N are interchangeable in Christianity, and God knows there's a lot of information on that. So that basically you boil down Christianity as sun worship, as astrology. Old Testament is astrology, sun worship. Yahweh, as I said, was associated with the sun and the planet Saturn. Let me give you another example about the ancient religions of the world. Moses was a lunar deity. Moses was a leader of the moon cult. This is why in all the paintings and sculpturings in Europe, you will always see Moses wearing horns. You ever seen that? Moses wearing horns. It's in the Vatican. It's in all the museums of the world. Why is Moses always pictured with horns? Because Moses was a leader of a lunar cult, the moon worshippers. So at one time, the Jews were worshippers of the moon. And that time, a period of time, we call the period of Moses. This is why, and why? It's because the Native Americans, their chiefs wear horns. The Vikings wore horns. Because all of these cultures, Native Americans, Vikings, and the ancient people of the Middle East, worshiped the moon. The moon, of course, in the lower quarter was the horns. And this is why they wore horns. In Arabia, there's a high mountain range in Arabia. And at night, from the Egyptian side, the moon comes up in the east, and it comes up from a mountain range. And so the ancient peoples believed that the moon was a god, and it lived in the mountain. And there are religious celebrations of the old man of the mountain, the moon god. And in the ancient Arabic system, the moon god was called Sin, S-I-N. That was his name. The moon god of Arabia was Sin. And a mountain in the ancient language was spelled Ai. So you take the mountain Ai with the god who lived in the mountain, the moon god, Sin, and put it together, it becomes Sinai. So you get Moses goes up into Sinai. No, it's Sin Ai, the mountain of the moon god. And this is why Jews have their celebration after sundown, because that's when the moon comes out. They don't have the celebration during the day because that's when the sun's out. So that's the time for Christians to celebrate God's Son. The Jews are worshiping the moon god, Sin. So I don't intend to, I'm not trying to offend anyone, but I'm just trying to tell you where religions come from. Religions have been given to us by the same people who gave us our government, our banks, our educational institutions, our whole entire ruddy system in Western civilization is based on religion, politics, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It's just business. It's just money. It's just to control the people. And if you think it's crazy when I say sex, you have no idea in the world how sex plays a part in everything. Black robes. Most people never question, why do Catholic priests wear black robes? Kids that graduate from high school wear black robes. Judges wear black robes. Rabbis wear black robes because black robes represent the planet Saturn. They are a symbol for the planet Saturn. Saturn was called by the ancient people Lord of the Rings. And Saturn is Lord of the Rings. This is why women were told in the ancient world to listen to their god. And the concept was they would wear an ear ring. Men were to get married before their gods. They wear a wedding ring because the old ancient god of the Middle East, one of the ancient gods of the Middle East, was the planet Saturn. Saturn was directly connected to Yahweh, the Hebrew God. And so this is why even today the Jews celebrate the worship of Saturn. Saturn in the old Phoenician language was called Shabbath. Look up in the Phoenician language, you will find that the planet Saturn was called Shabbath. And his worship to honor him once a week was called Sabbath. So when the Jews are having Sabbath, they're actually paying homage to their god Saturn, Lord of the Rings. And so when you start breaking down where religions have come from, theologies have come from, the six-pointed star, for instance, is called the Star of David. Actually, it's not the Star of David. All the encyclopedias and reference works will tell you that it's called the Star of Saturn. It is a hexagram. Hexagrams represented the planet Saturn. So, and then when you look at the Christian system of things, the church is a disgrace, in my opinion, period. The Christian church is a disgrace. Everything that comes out of the Christian church in America is a disgrace. It's filled with lies, deception, innuendos. It is a money-making corporation. It operates under maritime admiralty law. And there is a whole world of knowledge that Christians have not been given about the Scriptures, about who wrote the Bible, where it came from. I have found that even Judaism is not a BC religion. It did not exist in the BC. So when we talk about ancient Jerusalem, there was no ancient Israel. Jerusalem, yes, but no ancient Israel. So when you think about and how you have preachers and religious leaders talk about ancient Israel this and ancient Israel that, in point of fact, Israel is not a BC religion. The whole concept of the Old Testament was developed right around the 9th, 10th, and 11th and 12th century A.D. So that the Old Testament is not an ancient record of an ancient people. There was no ancient Israel. Two of the greatest scholars, archaeologists in Israel, have written a book called Unearthing the Bible. And these two men, these two archaeologists, are the best and the brightest of the archaeologists in Israel. And in their book, basically, that's what they said. There was no Moses, there was no King Solomon, there was no King David. The entire thing was written probably in the 8th, 9th, and 10th century A.D. in Europe, developed and ultimately taken. All of that was taken by the Jesuits in the Catholic Church and rewoven into a story and given to us today as an ancient Israel. There was no ancient Israel. Never existed. There was no Moses. There was no King Solomon. Solomon was Sol, Om, On. Sol is Latin for the sun. Om is the Hindu word for the creative force. And On is the name of the sun in Egypt. The Greeks call it Heliopolis, but the Egyptians call the city of the sun On. Go look in a dictionary, look up the word On. It will tell you it's the city of the sun in Egypt. This is why you flip a light switch on, because it was a city of light. So you take Sol, Om, On, the three names of the sun in the ancient esoteric languages, it becomes Sol, Om, On.